Welcome to the deep dive. We take the sources you send us and try to get you up to speed quickly, but, properly.
Thoroughly.
Exactly. And today we're diving into something pretty personal. Women's sexual fantasies. We're using Nancy Friday's book, My Secret Garden, which, wow, it's been quite the read.
It really has. It's based on interviews, letters, basically women sharing their, well, uncensored thoughts.
Right. And Friday makes this really interesting point right at the start, comparing it to her earlier book, The Sensuous Woman.
Oh yeah, the contrast she found. Apparently, asking men about their fantasies back then.
It was like pulling teeth, or worse.
She said it was almost like asking about rape. Just complete shutdown.
Wow. But the women for this book, much more open, seemingly.
Yeah, much more willing to share. So that kind of sets the scene for what we're exploring, the sheer variety and sometimes unexpected nature of these inner worlds.
Okay, so where should we start? Maybe with that idea about frustration.
Yeah, let's. Friday suggests that sometimes, sexual frustration or maybe just a lack of interest, I guess, in a real relationship
Yeah.
can really spark these fantasies.
Like a compensation thing. Something's missing, the mind fills it in.
Exactly. That's the idea.
And Madge is a pretty powerful example of that, isn't she?
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
Madge. She describes her sex life with her husband as quick, infrequent, impersonal.
Not exactly fulfilling by the sounds of it.
No. And that seems to fuel this incredibly detailed fantasy she has.
Right. The room full of men. Wealthy, older men.
Well dressed.
Yeah.
And she's sort of on display, breasts exposed, but the focus,
Mm.
it's all on her rear.
They admire it, touch it. That's what gets her aroused.
Yeah. And then that detail about the ice,
Oh, right. The champagne glasses filled with ice around her breasts.
which she links back to, better times with her husband. It's quite poignant, actually.
It really is. Like she's taking a fragment of something good from the past and weaving it into this other scenario.
And the spanking only happens right at the end, after all that focus on her rear. It's very specific.
It makes you wonder what she feels is missing in real life. Maybe that kind of specific appreciation. Something beyond just the usual.
Could be a different kind of attention, maybe. And then there's that letter, the woman who fantasizes about her husband forcing her.
Yeah, that one's intense.
Friday frames it as a potential cry of frustration. Like the fantasy provides a way to experience something. A dynamic, maybe, that's just not there otherwise.
So it's not always just about physical release, is it? It could be deeper needs being met.
Seems likely. Psychological, emotional needs, perhaps.
Which kind of leads into the next idea, doesn't it? Fantasies as a safe space for exploring stuff.
Exactly. Exploration and play. And this is crucial. Friday stresses that fantasizing about something doesn't mean you actually want to do it.
Right. That's so important.
She compares it to dreaming. We dream all sorts of wild, sometimes disturbing things. Doesn't mean we want them to happen when we're awake.
It's like an internal sandbox, yeah. No real-world consequences.
You can try things out mentally.
Yeah.
Like the woman who fantasizes about joining her husband and another woman, Helen.
Oh, the threesome fantasy. But it wasn't just watching.
No, she imagines actually joining in. And interestingly, she experiences this feeling of having a penis herself.
Wow. What do you make of that? Exploring different roles.
Could be. Maybe wanting to feel that sense of agency or just experience something totally different. She calls it feeling like she has everything.
And then the woman who imagines her husband's penis is, like, enormous.
Yeah, like a bull's. And she even uses her finger sometimes during sex to sort of enhance that feeling of being completely filled.
It really shows how fantasy can, like, amplify things, doesn't it? Dial up the intensity.
Absolutely. Just creating that desired sensation in the mind.
Which brings us to, well, the taboo stuff. The forbidden.
Right. And this is where, some listeners might find the content a bit surprising, perhaps challenging.
Yeah, definitely. There's the woman whose earliest sort of sexual thoughts were about erect penises in comic books.
Yeah. Which later developed into this fantasy about an African sex god.
But interestingly, her mom was apparently quite open about sex. So it wasn't about rebellion against repression.
Good point. Sometimes the forbidden might just be about novelty or something outside the everyday rather than breaking actual rules.
And then the book goes into, well, bestiality fantasies.
Rosie mentions a sort of fleeting childhood thought about her dog.
Right, just a flicker. But Jocelyn's are more recurring, involving dogs and horses.
Yeah, more detailed. And interestingly, her lover knows about them. They talk about it.
Well, it shows a level of openness, I guess, even with really unconventional themes.
It really does challenge assumptions about where the boundaries of fantasy lie. which leads us to a really complex area.
The sexuality of terror, rape fantasies.
Yeah. And it's so important to be clear here. The book interprets these not as a desire for actual violence, but potentially as a way for some women to navigate feelings around responsibility or guilt.
To feel desired, but like not in control. So they don't feel accountable for the desire.
That's the interpretation offered, allowing themselves to experience something intensely while feeling forced, relieving them of perceived responsibility. It's complex territory.
Definitely. Julie's fantasy is a striking example. The masked men in the warehouse.
Right, taken against her will, but she also feels protected, desired by all these men.
It's that paradox, isn't it? Overpowered but intensely wanted. Almost freeing in a strange way within the fantasy.
It might tap into a desire to just relinquish control sometimes, escape the everyday pressures.
And Sadie, fantasizing about rape by handsome, brutal men, described as exploring what she really wants.
Again, maybe seeking an intensity or dominance missing elsewhere.
And Johanna's story, that's really difficult. A past rape actually fueling fantasies later on.
And she mentions feeling arousal during the actual event, which surprised her. It's incredibly complex.
Yeah. And just to reiterate, the book isn't endorsing violence. It's trying to understand how trauma and desire can get tangled up in the mind.
Precisely. How the psyche processes incredibly difficult experiences. It raises huge questions.
Okay. Moving slightly. Another theme that comes up a lot is pain, masochism.
Yes. Being tied up, restrained. That seems quite common in the accounts.
Like the woman with the schoolgirl fantasy. Being caned.
Oh, yeah. Incredibly specific. The gym tunic, the directoire knickers, the whole scene.
And she tried to act it out, right?
With a friend and then a younger man. So the reality didn't quite match the fantasy's intensity, though.
Interesting. And the book mentions, like, historical context, caning and priests.
Yeah, briefly. Public canings and some accounts of priests using caning after confession, sometimes leading to, well, sexual encounters, apparently. It's suggesting maybe some historical link between punishment and arousal in certain contexts.
Food for thought. Then there's Amanda. Her fantasies get really extreme.
Right. Torture fantasies, racking, impalement, flogging, branding, even disembowelment.
And she says it's a release from boredom. Her husband is kind, but...
A bad lover, in her words.
Yeah.
It suggests fantasy is pure escapism, dialing up sensation to escape the mundane.
That stark contrast providing the arousal.
It seems like it. And then Natalie's story is different again, sharing her bondage fantasy.
After being scared too, right, and feeling relief.
Yeah, immense relief and connection with her lover. What's interesting there is the contrast she points out.
Between the fantasy and real life.
Exactly. In the fantasy, she likes being submissive, gagged. But in reality, she prefers being on top in control during fellatio.
So fantasy lets you explore sides of yourself that aren't your everyday persona, trying on different roles.
That's what it looks like, yeah. Different power dynamics explored safely.
Okay, what about being watched? Or watching? Exhibitionism and voyeurism.
Right. Michelle's fantasy of being on exhibition.
Where the act of being watched is the main turn-on, more than touch.
Seems so. And she also has these lesbian fantasies, but without physical contact. Just women trying to seduce her with movements.
It really challenges the idea that women's arousal is only about touch, doesn't it?
Absolutely. The psychological aspect, being desired, observed, is clearly powerful for her.
And then the whole crotch watching thing.
Yeah, which might surprise people who think only men are visually stimulated that way.
But the book quotes lots of women, Anna, Vera, Winona, Rudy, Gail, Imogene.
All talking about looking at men's crotches, noticing erections, finding it exciting.
So clearly, visual stimuli are a thing for many women. It pushes back on old stereotypes.
Definitely. And then Caroline, the actress, her fantasy is literally performing a love scene for an audience.
Needing that observation to get excited, her job bleeding into her fantasy life.
And she even swaps her lover's face for her colleagues in her mind sometimes. It's the audience that's key.
Wow. And that story about the neighbor accidentally exposing herself.
Oh, right. And how that sparked something new for both the neighbor and her husband.
Shows how unexpected things can just open a door, I guess.
Totally unpredictable sometimes. Which connects to the next point, how media and personal experiences shape fantasies.
Seems obvious, almost. What you read, what happens to you, it leaves a mark.
For sure. Like Alexandra, whose first orgasm was reading Candy.
And she kept using dirty books, as she called them.
Yeah. And later, her fantasies were tied directly to a past affair. The clothes, the places.
So early experiences, even through books, can be really formative.
Definitely, they can become templates.
Yeah,
and Lindsay seeing a penis briefly in the woods as a kid.
just a glimpse. And it fueled fantasies for years.
It's amazing how small moments can stick and grow in the imagination.
Yeah, like the woman whose lesbian fantasies started just from seeing someone on a train. Random triggers.
Our minds just grab onto things sometimes. Okay, what about a really common one? Fantasizing about other people during sex with your partner.
Ah, yes. The big question, is it bad? Does it mean something's wrong?
Well, the book suggests it's actually super common and not necessarily a sign of dissatisfaction.
Like the woman fantasizing about guys she knows begging her for an affair.
Right, maybe it's about feeling desired, chosen, powerful, even within a secure relationship.
Exploring your own desirability makes sense.
Or the woman imagining a past lover, G, and a specific game they played.
Well, with her husband, so bringing a past excitement into the present.
Could be. Accessing a feeling, a sensation, maybe. And Paula's situation sounds really intertwined.
Fantasy and reality blending with multiple partners.
Yeah, and she enjoys imagining her partner with someone else while they're together.
That's complex, pushes boundaries around traditional ideas.
It really does. Shows how fluid desire can be even within relationships, at least in fantasy.
Which brings us back to how private this all is.
Yes. The privacy aspect is huge. Friday emphasizes this.
And the potential for guilt or shame. Babs is a strong example, right?
Absolutely. She feels the pleasure comes from the privacy, afraid sharing would ruin it.
That reluctance speaks volumes, doesn't it? How personal and vulnerable this stuff is.
Totally. And some women feel guilty just for having certain fantasies, even if the real sex life is good.
Like there's an internal judge, societal expectations creeping into our private thoughts.
Seems that way. An internal censor, which maybe links to the last point, men's reactions.
Ah, yes. How men might react to hearing about women's fantasies.
Friday notes it can cause anxiety, defensiveness sometimes, echoing her earlier research experience.
Instantly. The idea your partner might be thinking of something else. It can feel like a threat or make them feel inadequate.
Potentially, yeah. Fear of not satisfying, maybe. Especially if the fantasies involve others or different scenarios. Societal pressures around male performance probably play a role.
Definitely. Okay, so wrapping up this deep dive into My Secret Garden, what are the big takeaways?
For me, it's just the incredible range, the sheer diversity, frustration, play, taboo, pain being watched. It's vast.
Yeah, absolutely. Fantasies aren't just one thing. They do so much: fill needs, allow exploration, escape boredom, enhance pleasure.
And they're deeply, deeply personal, often kept completely private.
It really gives you a glimpse into how complex an individual female sexuality is. Challenges a lot of assumptions.
For sure. Which leads us to that final thought for our listeners.
Right. Thinking about this huge variety of fantasies we've touched on, what does it tell us about female sexuality overall?
And maybe, how does understanding this richness challenge our own ideas, our own potential locked doors about desire? For ourselves, for others.
Definitely something to chew on. A lot to think about there.
Indeed. It invites reflection, maybe a bit of perspective shifting.
Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Hope it sparks some thoughts.
Until next time.